Welcome to the Empowered Investor Podcast, brought to you by the advisory team at Toulette Matthews and Associates. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the number of voices telling you how to plan or invest for your future? We're here to help you cut through the noise, bringing clarity to your investment decisions and helping you build lasting financial peace of mind. Learn more and subscribe today at tma-invest.com. Welcome to the Empowered Investor. My name is Keith Matthews, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Marcelo Taboada. Marcelo, how are you today?
Keith, I'm doing good. Very excited about today's episode. As I was telling you off mic, I've done a lot of interviews for the Empowered Investor podcast, but this is a subject that I'm becoming very passionate about it because I see the real impact we can have on clients if we address it early.
Wow, great intro. So what's the topic and who's the guest?
Okay, so we have Beth Pinsker. She's a CFP professional and a journalist in the United States. She writes for MarketWatch, and she wrote a book about financial caregiving for elder parents. So the book is called My Mother's Money, A Guide to Financial Caregiving.
Wow. Okay. So first of all, MarketWatch, that's a great website. That's a very reputable website. Yeah. I know after you had the conversation with Beth, you were super excited. You said, wow, Keith, there's so much great information here for our clients and listeners. Right. What are the kinds of things that Beth talks about in today's show?
So don't be mistaken by the title a lot because it's about financial caregiving, but it also, Beth also does a great job talking about the emotional cost, the time cost of taking care of an elder parent, how to talk to your family about it, how to deal with family dynamics, your brother, your sister, how to deal with all that, how to start the conversations with your parents. The book is honestly, I read a lot of books, you know that. It's my job and I like it. I think the book is excellent because three things. Is very personal, so you feel like somebody's sharing a personal story that's very powerful, very vulnerable from her part, but I think she did an amazing job. You get to know her a lot through the process, and I really enjoyed that. She gives you great resources, like a lot of guides at the end that you can use and conversation starters. So you're talking about, how to deal with messy bank accounts. She gives you opening lines on how to breach the subject with your parents. And also the way it's organized and it flows. Honestly, there's a lot of differences between Canada and the US. Obviously, we acknowledge that in the show, but I see this every day. If you have clients here who are in their 60s, 65s, and they're going to be dealing with this issue later on, it makes a world of a difference if you address it early and you plan for it.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So what we have in our world is we have clients that are currently, 50, 55, 60, 65. Correct. They're having to manage and work with and take care of aging parents. Correct. And that could be somebody in their early 80s. It could be somebody in their early 90s. Nonetheless, there's issues that need to be worked through. And I think that what you're talking about is Beth has created content that can help anybody who's dealing with aging parents.
Anybody.
And now, I'm assuming you cover, or she covers, conversations around bank accounts, investment accounts. How do you sell a house? How do you deal with financial affairs for anybody who's aging? Is that a fair assessment?
It even goes as far as she even gives you how to deal with somebody's phone when they die. So, for example, you can set yourself as a backup in your dad's phone, for example. So when he passes, you're able to access that phone. So it gives you so many useful tips that you don't think about. It's easy to think about the big picture stuff like the house, the big accounts. It's hard to think about the passwords. How am I going to access the computer and what gets paid through online banking and paper? It's good.
Yeah, and I know you were so enthusiastic when you finished the discussion with Beth. I'm excited to hear today's episode, Marcelo. For our listeners, we have 5 complimentary copies of My Mother's Money by Beth Pinsker. Please just email me at Keith, Keith, at tma-invest.com, and we will be really happy to send you a complimentary copy.
Enjoy the episode.
So thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Marcelo. Have a great episode.
Beth Pinsker, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So, look, I'm going to give you some praise. I read the book. I adore this type of books, by the way. They are so interesting to me. It is my job also to read about this because we take care of people's money. It's a huge privilege. But what I really loved about the book is it is very personal. It is very, very articulate. I love the fact that you consulted different professionals in the different chapters and the different issues you were discussing in the book. And I think what I love the most, and I will use this with a lot of my clients, is all the checklists and conversation starters you have at the end of the book. I found that's genius. Anyways, so let me just start there. Why did you write the book and why did you feel like this was something that needed to be shared?
Well, I wrote the book because that list at the back of the book, the resources and all the things you need for family members, so often sits unfilled in on the desks of people. People, financial planners, estate planners, they hand you this binder.
Yeah,
People sell them, at the bookshop. You can buy a next of kin box. You can buy
right.
a folder system. You can buy all these systems to organize yourself. And what happens is nobody ever fills out the
No.
information. They don't fill out the paperwork. They don't give anybody their passwords. And people are left in a mess and a muddle. And I think the reason why nothing works to get people to do these things is because we haven't adequately explained why. We haven't given people an urgency and a reason to do all of these things. And so, what my book tried to do is tell
Right.
my story, right?
Yep.
I'm a journalist. I write about people's sad financial stories every day. My column is called Fix My Portfolio, right? Like people don't know how to do all this stuff, and I try to help them through it. So, I'm always telling cautionary tales. And this is me being your cautionary tale.
Right.
I am telling you the hard things that I had to do taking care of my mom so that you don't have to go through any of that. And if you are the person who's going to need to be taken care of so that you don't leave a mess
Yeah.
for your kids. The only way you can get people to do that is to tell them a story.
First of all, I think it's very brave what you did because you had to share a lot of personal things in the book. To me, it was beautiful, like the relationship you had with your mom. It came from a place of love, right? And even if it's very like hard. And the other thing that was striking to me, I'm sitting there reading the book and saying, man, like she's a CFP. She works in the field. Like if this is hard for her, like imagine for like the average person who doesn't have a financial background, like it is incredibly hard.
All this paperwork stuff, it's really tedious. But the work you do on the front end is so much easier than the
Yeah,
work you
yeah.
have to do on the back end. If somebody just takes care of this for you, it's just so much easier. Like, for instance, I was talking about this last night. I was talking to a group of women financial advisors, and, we were talking about like where my book starts is my mom telling me what all the
Yeah.
burial
Yeah.
information is. And you're like, she was about to go into surgery. It was the absolute last
Right.
thing I wanted to talk about was her dying because it was not supposed to be a risky surgery that she was having. And, I wasn't ready to hear any of that. But she's like, no, this is the folder marked cemetery, and here's the phone number, and here's who you call, and here's where my plot is, and I need you to know all of this information. And, if she hadn't have done all of that, I realized when she did pass away, somebody dies and they look at you immediately, like in the next 2 seconds after somebody dies. They're like, okay, who
Right.
do you want us to call? And if you don't know that information and the person, hasn't set something up or said what they wanted, or there's not some family plan that's already in place, like somebody's going to make you do a real estate deal in the half hour after somebody has died. And you're like, that would have been so, so, so overwhelming. So you talk about like hard work. My mom calling the funeral home and the cemetery, 5 years before she died to set everything up was
Right.
one phone call that, she was willing to do because she had to do those things for her parents and it was hard. And she's like, I don't want my kids to do the same
Right.
hard
Right.
stuff I had to do. So she made those phone calls ahead of time so that when it came to be my turn, I didn't have to make those hard decisions. And then I look at myself as a parent and I say, well, my mom did that for me and made my life easier. I want to make sure that my kids are taken care of and that they don't have to do anything hard or harder than they have
Yeah.
to, harder than me dying would be. And so I made sure that I have a will that specifies what the plan is, with details about what's supposed to happen to me when I die. Now, I'm young at this point, but you never know. I don't know what's going to happen. So, but I know that that decision has been made and I don't have to think about it again. So if it doesn't happen for 40 more years, great. The plan's already set up.
I cannot tell you how many people we see through the door here and they don't have a will, they don't have an estate plan. And a lot of them have assets, yes, but even if you don't have a lot of assets, some of them have like 3, 4 kids, and it's just like a disaster in the waiting, right?
Yeah, it totally is. And I've talked to people who have negative bank balances. I talk about it as cleaning up your mess. Like when you die, no matter what you have, somebody has to, close the door and turn
Right.
out the lights, as you leave, right? You can't do these things for yourself because you're not dead yet. You cannot file your
No.
last tax return for yourself. You cannot close down your electric bill, before you die. Like there's just some things you can't do for yourself. And somebody has to pick up the ball and finish the job. And so who's that person going to be and how hard are you going to make it for them?
Yeah, and then the problem is in Canada, here, I don't know if you can relate to this, but because I do follow the news in the US, but I guess it's not as accentuated as it is in Canada. But right now in Canada, the two biggest financial planning worries, and people can debate me on this, I'm happy to take the debate, but is how can I help my kids with real estate and who's going to take care of me when I'm older and how will I pay for all this stuff, right? So the money component and, well, you talked about it in the book, right? It's not only a money component, it is an emotional burden as well. It can break a family. It can wreck a legacy of a person because if those family dynamics come into play and they become toxic, then it is very hard. But just let me ask you from your experience and what you learned in the book, where is the best place to start? Because I'm assuming there's also an element of secrecy and pride as well, right? Like you mentioned in the book how your mom was like super proud as well. And, it happens in families. I think about my parents, right? Not every culture and not every family has those conversations. So, in your opinion, where can people start to avoid this tsunami, I guess?
Yeah, so it starts with making sure that somebody has access to your financial life
Right.
and knows enough about it that they could follow your roadmap to it. So that in the US, I don't know if this is the same in Canada, that starts at the age of 18.
Right.
And it starts just with a general realization that we are all single legal entities as adults.
Right.
And, I tried to make a doctor's appointment for my 19-year-old while he was away at school. I'm like, oh, I better call the doctor and schedule something for when he comes home on spring break.
Right.
And they said, oh, how old is your child? I said, 19. They're like, oh, no, you need a healthcare proxy or he has to call himself.
Right.
I'm like, this is the child I've made plans for his entire life. I don't even know if he knows how to call a doctor. He would probably argue with me right now if he were home. But, I have a newly turned 18-year-old and an almost 20-year-old, and they are as much legal entities as I am.
Right.
And as my mom was, I'm a divorced woman, so it's just me, and my mom was a widow. So, nobody legally can help you in those situations. Nobody can legally make healthcare decisions for you or go into your bank account and move money around. There are rules, and banking rules are very strict these days about access.
Yep.
And technology is very sophisticated. Most people go around with this sort of old-fashioned notion that you have sort of, unofficial permission and somebody's password that you can go into mom's account and do whatever you need to do. Right. They catch you these days.
Oh,
like
yeah.
you can't sign a check for somebody else anymore. You can't call into the brokerage company and even request a form anymore. I was at an estate planning conference a few months ago, and a head of one of these online estate planning companies said to me she needed a change beneficiary form for her mother, who she was power of attorney
Right.
for. And she just didn't want to bother her mom. She's in the sort of early stages of dementia, and she just wanted to get it done. And so she called up the brokerage. She authenticated herself as her mom. And then the agent got on the phone. She's like, I need a beneficiary change form. And the agent said, well, it doesn't sound like you're 80 years old. And then she's like, whoop, I'm
Oh,
going to
yeah.
hang up.
Yeah. Because then they can flag the account and freeze it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Banks and brokerage houses are very concerned about fraud.
Yeah.
And elders are very susceptible to fraud and manipulation.
Yeah.
And they have sophisticated technology now to even assess the phone call if there's somebody whispering in the background. You can get your mom on the phone
Right.
and tell her what to say,
Right.
right? But if they hear you whispering in the background, like ask for the beneficiary form,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to flag it.
Right.
And so you can't pretend anymore. You need these legal permissions. And my argument for all of this is why I call it financial caregiving
Mm-hmm.
and barely use the word estate planning
Right. Right.
in anywhere in the book because estate planning turns people off. They
Yeah.
think, oh, I'm not ready to make a big plan. But the stuff you need to do when somebody is sick is urgent and it has a deadline.
Yeah.
And it all can become a big disaster because somebody's life is on the line. The stuff that happens afterwards, if it's a big, messy mess, the person's gone.
Yeah.
You have all the time in the world,
Right.
right? So if you have to go to probate and money's not an object, it's just time. The person's gone and it'll sort itself out eventually. But if somebody's sick and you can't pay their mortgage, their house is going to go into foreclosure.
Right.
Their bills aren't going to get paid. They're going to lose their insurance accounts. The rest of the family's not going to be able to eat. Bad things are going to happen if you can't access that information. And if you don't have the corollary permission on the medical side, then you still have to go to court and get guardianship to make medical decisions. Like somebody has to have those permissions. Somebody has to have access. And one thing I point out in my book and in articles I've written is you have to have access to their phone too. And that is a very specific, separate kind of permission.
I love that, by the way. Like in the book, do you have the steps of how to do it on the iPhone and the Android, how to set up a legacy person? Yeah.
They
Yeah.
call it a legacy contact. It is basically a beneficiary for the phone because I have heard from so many people who have been locked out of their loved ones' phones.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're basically locked out of their life. It's not just a nostalgia item. It's not just like the
No.
photos that are in there. You need their phone. Everything's in there.
Well, you
Like,
probably need their phone. You need access to all their passwords, their computer, like on top of like all the bank accounts and
Yeah.
the legal stuff, right?
So a lot of people will tell me, "Oh, it's okay. I have my mom's password." That is not good enough.
Yeah.
My mom didn't even know she had a password,
Right.
to her phone. Like my kids change their passwords all the time on purpose, but my mom would change stuff without even knowing. And my mom was great. She thought she was so on top of things, and she was a really super competent human being. And so when I would ask her, like, okay, I need to pay your electric bill, and I need to get into the account. Where's the password? And she's like, oh, I keep a book with all of my passwords. Well, I get to the book and open, it's like a old check register, with all like it says AT&T, and there's scribbles. I don't know if it made sense to her or not, or if she was just a little bit further gone than we thought she was,
Right.
but it literally was undecipherable. And so it was unhelpful to me. She thought she was writing everything down, and she clearly wasn't.
Yeah.
These practicalities get people tripped up.
I love the fact that you just said that about the estate planning and how you frame it, right? Because when somebody dies, you're absolutely right. You can pay somebody for that problem to go away. You can hire an estate company to settle the estate and fix all this stuff. But if you don't have the legal so in Quebec, just to give you some background, Canada is a complicated country. We have two legal systems. We have the common law in the rest of Canada, and then we have the civil code in Quebec, which comes from the Napoleonic Code, the French tradition, and they view the law very differently. So in Quebec, you need a power of attorney and a mandate. The mandate serves for incapacity. When the person becomes incapacitated, you need to have those in place. And the power of attorney acts like you become the legal representative of the person. But one of the things that we always do here, and I think it helps jumpstart the conversation, is we tell people, look, the time to set this up is when you're healthy. Like when you start to feel like things become a bit harder for you to understand. And it's a very hard conversation to have because a lot of these people are very proud and they were very successful in their lives. And now you have to sit across them and say, hey, look, things are getting harder, right? I get it. It's tough, but this is a way for you to protect your legacy. And not only that, to help the family legacy, because if this happens and it becomes a problem later on, it will ruin your legacy. Kids will fight. And that's the last thing you want. Of course, we try to massage that message, right, in ways that people can digest it. It is a very sensible conversation, but essentially in Canada, you have to do that. You have to set powers of attorney when you're healthy, where the person still can follow up. And the moment they become incapacitated, you have a mandate in place and that you'll just slide right in. But most likely what happens is this is the people who have the luxury of having an advisor or having somebody who's on top of things. But if you fall into a situation when something bad happens and you don't have those things in place, you'll still be okay, but you're going to have to navigate so much bureaucracy and the delays are going to be incredible. And just add to the stress that you're dealing with a sick parent, like it's just incredible.
Yeah, in the US, there was just a big state of the estate planning industry survey from Trust and Will, which I think also operates in Canada. And 26% of people had a will, only 11% had the power of attorney documents.
Yeah. Well, you see people all the time that walk with a will and they don't have a power of attorney and a mandate. We suggested people get all three done at the same time because if this is a matter of saving $500, like, come on, like that's not an excuse, right?
It's not, because going to court in the US costs $20,000 in a year of your life. We look at celebrity cases, if you follow the case of Jay Leno, this is in practical terms what happens. Jay Leno is 74. His wife is 72. She has dementia.
Right.
They never got a power of attorney done. He wanted to create a trust structure to take care of her in case he would predecease her. Right? He's a 74-year-old overweight, man.
Right.
Like there's a chance that he could go before her.
Yeah.
So he wanted to set up these things, but he didn't have the power of attorney. She was too far gone in dementia to sign the papers. So he had to go to court to get guardianship over her to set up a trust to protect her. And it's all public because that's how the guardianship process works. But this is a very common scenario that happens in families. You get to it too late, and I'm saying that the age to get to it is 18. This should just be a common thing that you add. You get your driver's license, you go off to college, you get power of attorney and healthcare proxy, because if you're away at school, it's just a practical thing. Like my analogy for it is, a lot of people leave a spare key at the neighbor's in case they get locked out, right? You don't expect the neighbor to just let themselves in and make tea at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's there in case you need it. Right. And so it's not handing over your life when you fill out one of these documents. It's not handing everything over. It's a conditional document. It's there in case of emergencies. But the extra step you need in the U.S., and I'm not sure about this in Canada, is that just having the papers means nothing in the U.S. You have to put them in a financial institution and get them approved and noted on the account.
Correct.
You have to go down to the bank. All the financial institutions these days want you to show up in person with the person, with the two people. Like, I need to show up with my mom. We never did that. So by the time I went to take the papers in, my mom was in the hospital, completely incapacitated. She couldn't walk after her surgery. And I go to the bank and I say, here's my power of attorney documents. And they said, no, you need a court order. And I said, no, I don't need a court order. These are properly executed by a lawyer and notarized. This is all I need.
You know your stuff, right?
I know my stuff. Right. And they said no. And they said, she has to come down here herself. And I said, well, obviously she can't do that. Can I show you a picture of her in the hospital? And they knew her. It was her local branch. She had been there 1,000 times. Wow. Still, the answer was no. And so I said, can I get her on the phone? Can we send a notary to the bedside? What are the solutions here? There was no other solution. So I stood my ground and I said, you're going to have to find a way to accept these documents. And in my book, I interviewed a lawyer who actually had to sue a bank to get the documents enforced because they said no to her. And she said, you can't say no to me. You have to. It's a state law. Right. And they said, nope. She said, well, I'm going to sue you. They said, good luck with that. And she did, and she won. Yeah. Families you have to get through the red tape. You have no other choice as a customer, as a human being who needs this stuff done. But the caveat to this is you have to be right. You have to have the documents. Yes. And they have to be correct documents. Now, my parents had moved a whole bunch of times. Yes. They're very specific to your location, like you in your province. Need 2 documents. Right. In another province, if you have moved from another province, your documents might be old. You might not have the right ones. Yep. Any longer than 5 years, and these things go stale because laws change. Now, my mom's were done within 5 years in the state where she lived because I was a CFP by that time.
Right.
I knew that what she needed to have done. When my father died, which was 5 years before my mom, I said, the first thing you need to do as a single adult is go and get all these things redone. You got to go to an estate attorney
Yeah.
and full package done.
Yeah.
And she did, thank goodness. But a lot of people don't listen to that. My parents moved from Pennsylvania to New Jersey to Florida.
Yeah.
When they lived in Pennsylvania, they had very simple, couple wills that say, I leave everything to you and you leave everything to
Yeah.
me. And if anything happens to me, you can take care of everything. And me and my brother at that point were still kids.
Yeah.
So we weren't named on any of these documents as legal successors, to my father who was deceased. So, you kind of have to keep up on this stuff in order to make sure. Because if you go to the bank and you stand your ground and you stomp your feet and you yell at people and your documents are no good,
Yeah.
they're just going to keep saying no and they're going to be right instead of you being right.
Yeah, we advocate here, and you're exactly right. Those documents have to be tight. They have to be reviewed every year, every 2 years, fair. Because what happens is one person dies and the other one, goes on, and they were each other's beneficiaries and executors. And then maybe the backups are not even relevant anymore. Or a kid, I feel things get complicated, Beth, when one person lives out of province or they're far away. In Canada, I've consulted lawyers about this. You're a person and you have property in many different provinces. You should have legal document for every province where you own property. So it
Yeah.
makes things easier, right? But one of the other things that we do, and here to get ahead of that, is we advocate really hard for having a family meeting with client who's like 70, 75. The family meeting is usually mediated by us. If they don't want to go that way, is we just give them an agenda of things to talk about. You talk about legacy, what they want to do with the money, what the estate plan will be. And the clients always ask me, like, who do you think my executor should be? And I always ask them, from your kids, first of all, who lives closer to you? And number two is, who's the one who can handle stress
Yeah.
and pressure the best? Because settling an estate and being an executor is not an easy task.
Yeah, I don't understand people who fight over who gets to be the executor. It's not who gets the money.
Exactly.
It's like who gets the headaches and the work and everybody nitpicking them. And yeah, no, it is not at all fun to do any of that stuff.
No, no. But let me ask you something here. The family dynamics are real, but I mean, you live through this, you have a brother. How can families deal with this? Because here's what tends to happen, right? And please correct me if I'm wrong. First of all, it tends to be disproportionate to women, right? Like women end up taking most of the burden. It has an emotional cost. It has a financial cost, like you describe in the book. I mean, some of the statistics that you listed in the book were so scary in page 31. I'm not going to go through them. I'll encourage people to buy the book. But how can people deal with the inequalities that happen from caregiving? How can families deal with this?
I'm doing a follow-up story because so many people ask me this question. It seems like the most common family dynamic is there's one kid who does everything.
Yeah.
And the other one swoops in at some point to tell them they're doing everything wrong.
Yes.
That seems to be the most common dynamic. And all anybody wants to know from me is like, this is great. I need to know all this information. I need to do all this stuff. What do I do about my sibling who's a jerk? And I use the term jerk because to mean anything. They could be a narcissist.
Right.
They could be a drug addict.
Right.
Whatever it is, somebody is causing trouble. And the more siblings you have, the more chance there is for trouble, or just the more disparity there is between incomes and situation in life and whatever it is. And I say that the number one thing that drives sibling conflict is that the troublesome sibling, and we all know who the troublesome sibling is, you just know.
Yes.
Their number one fear is being left out.
Yeah.
And if you understand that they operate from a place where they think a group family text is going on without them in it, that is causing all of the problems. And they will cause any amount of disruption just because they have that feeling that they're not included in the decision making. So they want to be executor because they think the executor is doing something to cut them out, when really all the executor doing is doing is the horrible scut work
Yeah.
that nobody else wants to do.
100%. I feel like all the family issues and traumas tend to come out in this situation, which
Yes.
is very sad.
And so the solution is you have to cut that person in. Like you have to read them, include them. Like don't have family texts without that person
Yeah.
included. Like
Yeah, yeah.
don't make decisions without consulting them. Don't do things behind their back. Be upfront about everything. If you are executor or power of attorney, these are fiduciary
Correct,
roles.
correct, correct.
You have to work in the best interest of the person you're representing. And you have to understand, like, when I equate it because I'm divorced, when you are divorcing and you have children, you may hate your toxic ex, with the fire of 1,000 suns, but they're still the parent of your
Yeah,
child, and you
yeah.
oftentimes cannot, you just have to learn some way to deal with it. When you are dealing with a toxic or troublesome sibling, they are still the child of the parent that you're taking care of.
Yes.
There is no way to just completely cut them out
No,
of that
no, no, no.
relationship because your parent, for good or bad or whatever, they still love both their children or all of their children. And so you're kind of stuck with your sibling.
Yeah.
So I say make them feel useful with some very time consuming but inconsequential tasks. And just to joke on my brother, who I love and who is wonderful,
Right.
for instance, my brother is in charge of digitizing all the family photos.
Nice.
It's a great task. I'm in charge of settling the entire estate.
Yeah.
He's in charge of the family photos. It's been 3 years.
Yeah.
And anytime he asks me about how am I doing on this, that, or the other task, I say, great, how are you doing on the photos?
Yeah.
And the conversation ends
Right.
because he doesn't want to admit that he hasn't digitized any of the photos.
Right. Well, you know what? Some of the best cases, to give you some background, we have a lot of clients here who very successful careers, retired, and now they're in that age that they have to start thinking about legacy planning and estate planning, obviously. But the situations I've seen that work the best from my experience is where, because, life happens, right? You're going to have inequality. Some kids did better in life. Some kids did not worse, but not at the same level as the other ones economically. So what tends to happen is one kid will take the burden of the financial side. The other kid will take the burden of the time side, right? Or dealing with different issues that require more time and bureaucracy. And there's sort of like a balance. So those are the best case scenarios. But I would even say that the best cases that I've seen is where people do have those conversations and they sit in the table and they say, okay, how are we going to get this done? What are your strengths? What are the things that are not working? What are the things that are working? What do we want? Ultimately, they're both working for the parents, right? I think you have to, as a person, put that ego aside at some point and look at the greater picture here.
Yeah. And, the only solution to a sibling conflict is court.
Oh, which you don't
So
want to
the
go that
parent,
route.
there's no other entity that can override, a sibling fight.
Right.
Mom and dad can,
No.
but if mom and dad are incapacitated or have died, then nobody can settle the dispute between siblings except a judge or, if they're sent to mediation. But like that's the only route you have to go. So short of that, you guys got to work it out.
Yeah.
Like, just like
100%.
mom and dad would say, go over there and talk it out,
Right.
hug it out, dance it out, whatever you got to do. Because there's no other way but court, and court is terrible.
Oh, yeah. Like you can say goodbye to the family legacy from that point, right?
Exactly. And I would say that money is the easiest. Money can be parsed down to the last penny and split. What's hard are things that are unique, that there's only one of. This is where houses become problems because that's
Yeah.
the biggest, asset that you have to split, but it's hard to split a house.
Right.
And then you get down to, people fight over spoons, people fight over couches, like people fight over things that there's only one of, and they're just not rational or mature about it.
Yeah. Let me switch gears here and let's talk about some of the financial planning aspect of all this. So, as you experience taking care of a parent, it is very expensive. And
Very.
so traditional financial planning, I find it is a bit, I feel sometimes it gives people a false sense of hope. There's not enough planning done when it comes to like later stages of life. So how can we deal better with this?
Well, I think that you have to be more realistic about timeframes
Yeah.
because, most financial planning calculators and most financial planners are taught to use those calculators in the sense of a long time horizon.
Yeah.
An unknown long time horizon. Like so you start planning for retirement and it's 30, 40
Yeah.
years. We are not very good at like a short, acute time period.
Right.
When my mom got sick, we didn't know what the outcome was going to be.
Right.
And we had to figure out she's got, X amount of dollars. We're spending, X amount now. It was about $15,000 a month.
That's crazy.
It's only going to go up from there.
Right.
What are our choices and how long is what she has going to last? And what are our choices when that money runs out? And how do we access it? And in what order do we access it? These are all questions that I found financial professionals very untrained to answer because we are better at optimizing situations rather than unoptimizing them. For instance, my mom was dealing with, a representative at an annuity company.
Right. You talked about that in the book. Yeah.
And I needed money in August, and she wasn't to get money in December. And there were contract restrictions for a 5-year surrender period
Right.
that would have made her money worth less if we accessed it before October.
Right.
But I needed the money in August. And I knew like this is my job. I know I need the money in August.
Right.
And if I don't get it from my mom's annuity, I got to lay it out of my pocket.
Right.
It was a large sum of money. We were probably going to be spending $20,000 a month by then.
Yeah.
So I was going to need $60, $70, $80,000.
And mind you, this $15,000, $20,000 is after tax dollars that you need.
Yeah.
So you need to be mindful about that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I needed to break into this money. And the advisor was telling me, it's not a good idea. I'm like, well, duh, I know it's not a good idea.
But I need the money today.
But as her representative, as power of attorney, he was, not sure what the best interest of the client was, right? In theory, it's not in her best interest to break into money and use it and pay a fee to use it. The same way, you wouldn't want to pay extra taxes on something.
Of course.
You want to do things smartly. And I said, she's got a very short amount of time to live. We need her money now. And then what happened is, I was planning for August in June, and she died in July. Life has its way of doing whatever life does and changes your plans. But if she had lived longer, I would have been like, no, we need this money now.
Right.
You're supposed to take $90,000 for her RMD in December, and I need it in August instead, and I need double the amount that she usually takes.
I think people underestimate the cost of healthcare. In Canada, we have, in the US, I learned a lot in your book, by the way, from how the
We're screwed here.
it is so
We're
complicated.
screwed.
It is insane how complicated it is in the US, like to navigate Medicaid, Medicare, the long-term insurances. So in Canada, we have, as you know, we have single-payer healthcare. So we have the private system and we have the public system. But the public system is they'll take a certain amount of your income up to a certain point. So after $2,000, that's the max they'll charge you in the public system. The private system, Beth, can go from $5,000 a month to $15,000 a month. So one of the things that I think as planners we need to do better is to be realistic about those conversations, because if you have a client in your office and you say, look, you're going to have $2 million at the end of life if you continue to spend $60,000 a year, but if you do get sick and you want better care, it's going to be expensive, right? And I think that the harder dynamic, and you talked about this in the book, so I want to hear your thoughts on this, is when you have a person who's going to inherit, let's say you have a 45-year-old client, 50-year-old client who knows is going to inherit the money and now has the responsibility of taking care of the parents. Like, it's a conflicting incentive because you want to take care of your parent, yes, but you also have an incentive of protecting your inheritance, which is a very human thing. I'm not blaming anyone, but it is a very tough situation.
It is. It's a weird feeling. Self-dealing is strange, right? Third parties probably should be making all these decisions and helping, it would be helpful in that sense. But I think what it comes down to is if you are the person who ends up making the decisions about how the money is spent, really take that fiduciary responsibility
Right.
serious. And this is where a lot of sibling relationships go south.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you are the one making that decision and you have a sibling who is worried about that money dwindling, sometimes it's because they worried about what their inheritance is going to be. A lot of times it's because, like my mom's situation with her parents, the money dwindled and then she and her brother had to kick in.
Yeah.
So like you're like, okay, if I spend down all this money on my parents and it goes to zero, then I am on the hook for paying for it.
Right.
In the US, you're not on the hook, legally speaking. But you guys have the same issue that we have, is that a system that caps your payment or whatever the government payment is a third of what private pay is.
Right.
And you get a third of the value in
Yeah,
the
I
service,
mean, to me, like my wife's grandmother ended up in a public institution, and it was such a wake up call and a painful thing to go through because the for me, I can have the stark comparison because I had that experience and I go visit clients in residences, right? And I see the level of care you get when you have private care. Now,
Yeah.
the public
It
system.
costs three times more, but it's three times better.
Correct. Correct. So it's just a tough one. I think what worries me the most is how I need to be very careful here, but I think people have a lack of understanding of how complicated it gets once you get to that stage. So I think it's good that people have this view that, you have to have a positive view of life, but it's also like it's almost negligent not to think about what all the implications are. I think in Canada we're going to have a bigger problem. Like I'm seeing it more and more with clients now, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah. The more common dynamic I hear about, and the more common mental dynamic that I hear about, psychological, is people don't want to go in either the private or the public.
They want to age at
Uh,
home, right?
they want to age at home, or they want to, move in with their children and age in their homes. And it's just not feasible sometimes.
No.
And if you have had a parent who says, I don't ever want to be in one of those places, and you get, 10 years into a dementia diagnosis and you have to consider memory care because being at home is just
Yeah.
not feasible, it is really, really just crushing psychologically
Yeah.
to go against your parents' wishes in that sense. But it is entirely the appropriate thing to do medically and for their safety. And so it's this push pull constantly of what's the right thing to do, what's the responsible thing to do with the money. Like you really have to balance a lot of things, and it's just really hard. And that's where, if you are the person who's going to need that care, and I'm thinking about myself in this circumstance, I want my kids to know exactly what I want.
Yeah.
And I want to make a plan for that myself so that they aren't burdened by those decisions. My mom made those decisions for herself, and all I had to do was execute her wishes.
Right.
And that made my life so much better because I didn't have to, along with everything else, I didn't have to second guess myself.
Yes.
I could
That's tremendous.
push the paperwork through, but I didn't have to have feelings about it.
Right. That's such a great point, but you had that open line of communication, which is what often is lacking. So the other thing that I'm seeing is, I tend to do this we're onboarding people here with discovery meetings. I always ask people like who are 35, 40, 45, tell me about your parents. Like, are we in a situation where you're going to have to help them? Because that's a very different financial plan as if you're going to get an inheritance down the line. So I think that conversation, the sooner it starts, the better it is.
Absolutely. Yes. And my daughter has now promised me that if I need help in my later years, she'll be there for me. So
you must have a very solid estate plan or caregiving plan, right? Because you've gone through all this.
Well, it came along with her realizing how expensive college was going to be. And she's like, okay, I see the trade-off now. You're going to help me with all of this, and I'm going to help you down the line.
Yeah.
That's how it works in families.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard now, right? Because you start seeing, we're living longer, right? It's a great thing. A lot of times people have talked about this, right? The health span, it doesn't mean it's going to be a good. No, I think I'm mixing this up. I think lifespan doesn't mean health span. So like you can live a long time, but it doesn't mean you're going to be healthy. And that has massive financial implications. But just another question on the financial planning side. If you were like in your 40s, 45s, and you have parents that are going down that path, what's the one thing that you would recommend to them to do on the financial planning side?
I would recommend that they look at their big expenses first, their housing, and maybe they need to downsize earlier than they thought they were going to. And maybe look at one of, the kind of care communities that progress with you as you age.
Yeah.
Maybe a shift to one of those. If you sell the house you're in and move into one of those communities, it's a big buy-in usually, but then you don't have to worry about those housing decisions and what you're going to do down the line. And when care needs come around, you already have a slot and it's already kind of taken care of in the payment.
The housing decision is such a tough one. I find in my experience, I'm sure, I don't know if for you it's the same experience, but people have a very hard time, downsizing or just selling their primary residence. Not only because I think it's the emotional side, right? Like all the memories are there. It's a place of gathering for the family. But yeah, change is just hard the older you get.
Yeah. I wrote a piece the other day about my own retirement plans.
Right. Congratulations, by the way. I know you announced your retirement 5 years from now.
5 years from now, little item in there about needing to assess my living situation because my dog is aging and can't go down the back stairs to the yard anymore. And somebody wrote in the comments that is absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't consider my dog's health needs. And I'm like, it was a metaphor for me not being able to do the stairs.
Right, right.
But also, this is what we need to consider. Like, part of my retirement plan is where are we going to live that the next place we go is going to be suitable for, the whole family, which includes the dog, for us to age in place, down the road. That's a consideration I'm making now at 54 and a half, so that when I'm 59 and a half and I'm actually going to retire and make this move, that I make a smart move that I don't have to change and correct in 5 years after that. Because who knows what the market will be then? Who knows how much I'll have left? Who knows what real estate prices will be? Smarter to make that choice earlier rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at and I'm speaking from like what I see here in Canada is you have a lot of people who have been fortunate enough to accumulate a portfolio and have those assets to get them through life and the later stages in life. But you do have a lot of people who are sitting on $1-2 million homes. We have a term called house rich, cash poor, and you need that liquidity event. So it's either going to be you really have to think about unlocking that liquidity, whether it is selling or doing a reverse mortgage. Those are options. But, the reverse mortgage is an okay one, but you still have to take care of the house. You still have the maintenance. Like, how many people I see in my neighborhood who are between the age of 70 and 80 who live in 4-bedroom homes are completely empty. And I see them myself, like they can't even walk properly and they have to shovel snow, clean the leaves. Okay, you can bring people in, pay for the services, but at some point it's going to be unsustainable.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's easier to think about the dog's needs, and the dog not being able to go down the stairs than it is for me to think about myself not being able to go up and down the stairs.
Yeah. So this is more of a question for you. You had an idea of what this process was going to be, but what's the one thing that surprised you the most, and what's the one thing that you weren't expecting at all?
Oh gosh, there was so much. I was not expecting it to go so fast.
Okay.
Life is its own thing and you cannot control it. I didn't foresee my mom's health crisis becoming a terminal kind of thing.
Right.
And I was planning for a much longer time period than life allowed her. So that took me by surprise. And the things that we didn't plan for, because we thought we had time.
Right.
Because, we thought that things would be smoother than they were. We didn't do certain things. One thing that still gets me is I had planned to, go through all the knickknacks in the cabinets with my mom and say, videotape her telling me the story behind each one.
Right.
And we just never got to it.
Right.
Just never got to that. And so when my brother and I went to clean out the apartment, we didn't know what was important all the time. And what was it? Little memento on the thing. And I'm like, is this from our trip to Israel? And then I turned it over and it had a sticker from like Home Goods on it.
Right.
Oh, this is something she got for $6 from Home Goods that she thought looked nice and she put it on the shelf. But how was I to know? Like, I might have taken that and cherished it as if it were some biblical icon. It's a $6 thing from Home Goods. So, like, that's the sort of thing I missed out on.
Yeah. Well, look, would you say it's changed your view of life and your relationship with your kids? Yeah,
Oh,
you
absolutely.
must say, right?
Absolutely. I mean, part of my decision to retire at 59 and a half,
Oh, interesting.
which is, generally early, and I love what I
Right.
do, and all of that is because my parents died when they were both 76.
Right. And that's
And the
young for
thought,
this.
yeah, the thought of working until I'm 70, and I have a day job, I'm
Right.
not just a writer who sits at home all day
Right.
and, I have meetings
Right.
and deadlines and performance reviews and all of the things that come with the job. And I don't want to, necessarily spend my good years doing all of those things.
Yeah.
And so it has definitely made me see that, like, there is life to be lived and cherished, and that's the importance of us being here.
Yeah.
And the stuff that I was uptight about and, on a hamster wheel for is not the important stuff.
That's so interesting. Like I did get that sense from the book, and it's made me think and reflect a lot about my personal relationships, family relationships. So I'm guessing that's a nice collateral effect of the book besides having the practical aspect. And I think your book is fantastic and it's going to help a lot of people. And, I almost wish that somebody wrote a similar book in Canada with all the practical implications in Canada with the legal system and the medical system. So if you ever want to move to Canada and live here for a few years and write the book, I would encourage you to do so.
There is talk of a Canadian edition where there would be like an addendum to each chapter that would
Right,
say this is how it translates
right.
to Canada, but it's hard because it's so US specific.
Yeah. The conversation starters are genius, by the way, because
Yes,
I
thank
find
you.
like you can get lists. We have a family organizer where you put all the names and the addresses, but the conversation starters, like you're just giving them to people. You just go and repeat those things to your parents, and like it'll get the conversation going. And at least even if it doesn't go anywhere, at least you tried.
By the way, if I give that out, the back part of the book, I give that out for free if anybody wants it.
Oh, nice.
If you subscribe to my newsletter or you have a verified purchase of the book, you can just email me on my website, and I have a PDF version of just the back end of the book that's the resource guide. Because a lot of people have asked me, even they've bought the book
Right.
and they say, okay, but I need, I bought the book, I read the book, but I need one for my mother-in-law and I need one for, my mother. And I need one for me, and I need it on multiple versions. I'm like, okay, here you go.
What we'll do is we'll ask you for all the links and we'll put them in the episode notes.
My website, bethpinsker.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. Look, I'm going to wrap up here. I think this has been a fascinating conversation. I can go for another 3 hours, but I know I'm going to get flack for this because I tend to talk a lot, but that's okay. One last question. If looking at our futures, like I put myself in this situation now, what's the single most practical gift I can give to my future caregivers to make their job easier in the future? What is that one thing that I can give them today?
Simplify your life. Don't have accounts all over the place. Like, I don't know, I worked at Fidelity for a little bit, and as part of the compliance process, you had to transfer all of your accounts to Fidelity and have them all in one
Right.
place. Having all your stuff in an easy to follow roadmap is the single most useful thing. Because, like, if somebody has to come in, like a forensic accountant, and do stuff for you, they need to be able to follow your train of thinking. If you have stuff all over the place and randomly do this, that, or the other thing, nobody's going to know and it's all going to fall apart. So the most useful thing you can do is just be simple.
That's music to my ears.
Why do you need four savings accounts? Why do you have accounts in four different banks? Why do you have, 401ks that you've never followed up on?
Right.
You guys don't have 401ks, but retirement accounts from 3 jobs ago.
Right.
Consolidate, consolidate, consolidate.
That's music to my ears, and it's something we appeal here. It's something we advocate. I would even tell you, we tell clients sometimes who want to split advisors. They come here and, hey, I want to give you a few million here and maybe keep another few million with my other advisor. We'll say, look, that's great, but my advice is choose one advisor. We hope it's us, but if it's the other person, it's okay. But just
Yeah.
have one person. It'll make life easier. And simple is beautiful. I find that people have a hard time with that, especially with finances. They feel they have to overcomplicate things, even when building portfolios, right? So anyways, look, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your generosity. I think I took more time than I asked for, but this conversation was fascinating. We'll put all your information and socials in the notes. I'm sure people will reach out. I am talking to a lot of people about your book. I really love the way you wrote it, how practical it is. Even if it doesn't apply to Canada, I still learned a ton. It's translatable, right? At the end of the day, we're human beings and we all have the same issues.
Yeah, and we all have moms and dads.
That's right. Beth, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Empowered Investor Podcast, brought to you by Tulette Matthews and Associates. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe and share it with somebody who wants to invest with clarity and confidence. To learn more about how we help investors build lasting financial peace of mind, visit us at tma-invest.com. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and stay on track to your financial goals. Investment and investing strategies should be evaluated based on your own objectives. Listeners of this podcast should use their best judgment and consult a financial expert prior to making any investment decisions based on the information found in this podcast.